Imagine a crowded square in the heart of an ancient city. The sun beats down as men gather to watch, children press forward, and women lower their eyes. At the center stands a woman, her arms bound, her hair hacked short, her body trembling in the heat. She is not accused of murder, theft, or treason. Her crime is disobedience. The punishment about to unfold is not about justice, it is about control. Her humiliation is staged, her suffering transformed into theater. Every lash, every jeer from the crowd carries a message. This is what happens when women defy the order of men. From Rome's Vestal virgins buried alive, to Greek wives paraded naked, to Egyptian priestesses stripped of dignity in rituals meant to purify, history reveals a chilling truth. Torture was never random, it was systematic, designed to turn women's bodies into warnings. This was not punishment, it was domination disguised as morality. A performance so powerful it silenced not only the victim, but every woman who watched. So we must ask, why did ancient societies invent torture that attacked not just the body, but the voice, the womb, the very identity of women? To understand how ancient societies justified the torture of women, we must go deeper into the myths, beliefs, and laws that made such cruelty not only acceptable, but celebrated. These punishments did not emerge from chaos. They were born from systems religious, cultural, and political that defined women as dangerous and in need of control. Torture was the enforcement arm of ideology. Consider the myths that shaped the ancient world. In Greece, the story of Pandora described the first woman as a curse, unleashing suffering on humankind by opening her jar of evils. In Hebrew scripture, Eve's bite of forbidden fruit condemned all women to labor and pain, branded as weak-willed, lustful, and in need of guidance. In Mesopotamia, female goddesses who defied men were recast as monstrous demons, symbols of chaos to be subdued. These stories weren't innocent folklore, they were cultural blueprints. They taught generations that women carried danger within them, that curiosity, desire, or independence could unravel the order of the world. By painting femininity itself as suspect, myths laid the groundwork for punishment. From temples to altars, religion gave sacred weight to control. In Egypt, women were honored as mothers and priestesses, yet their roles were tightly bound to fertility and service. A woman who defied those roles was not simply rebellious, she was impious, a threat to cosmic order. In Rome, the Vestal virgins symbolized purity. Their punishment, burial alive for breaking chastity, was framed as divine necessity. The torture was not described as cruelty but as purification. Similarly, in Greece, women accused of adultery or impiety were publicly shamed, their bodies made examples in rituals supposedly pleasing to the gods. Religion turned violence into virtue. Torture became not only legal, but holy. By sanctifying cruelty, societies erased compassion and framed humiliation as a sacred duty. Where myth created suspicion and religion gave sanction, law built the cage. In Rome, the legal doctrine of Manos gave husbands absolute authority over their wives. A woman could not own property, make contracts, or choose freely. Her body and her voice legally belonged to men. Greek law was no kinder. Women were excluded from courts, politics, and citizenship. Their testimony was often dismissed, their agency erased. In Babylon, the Code of Hammurabi detailed punishments for women who defied husbands' beatings, mutilations, even drowning. The law did more than enforce obedience. It codified humiliation, ensuring that when a woman was tortured, it was not an act of cruelty but the letter of justice. Beneath myths, religion, and law lay an even deeper current: fear. Ancient societies feared the power of women's bodies. The ability to bear life was revered but also terrifying. A woman's sexuality was framed as dangerous, her fertility as something to be harnessed, and controlled. Adultery was punished more harshly for women than for men, not because of morality, but because of lineage. A child's paternity had to remain certain for inheritance, so women's bodies became battlegrounds of legitimacy. Controlling them through torture ensured that property, bloodlines, and power stayed in male hands. Even menstruation was turned into stigma. In many cultures, women were secluded during their cycles, branded as unclean. This biological reality became another justification for separation, silence, and punishment. Women's knowledge, too, was feared. Midwives, healers, and priestesses carried ancient wisdom of herbs, medicine, and childbirth. Yet this knowledge often marked them as dangerous. In Greece and Rome, accusations of poisoning or sorcery often targeted women healers. Their skill was recast as witchcraft, their independence as threat. To silence them, torture was used. Public punishments not only destroyed individuals, but sent a clear message. Knowledge outside male control was unacceptable. Women could be wise, but only in service to men. Anything else was rebellion. At the heart of this system was humiliation. Myths told women they were flawed. Religion told them they were sinful. Law told them they were property. Fear told them they were dangerous. Torture tied all these threads together, transforming ideology into physical suffering. Humiliation worked where violence alone could not. A woman who was beaten might recover, but a woman paraded naked through the streets, branded or forced into absurd public rituals, carried scars that lingered far beyond pain. The community became the enforcer. Her humiliation was shared, remembered, and retold. What made this system so insidious was how it disguised itself. Men claimed torture was not cruelty but necessity. They said it preserved purity, protected families, and upheld divine order. But beneath the rhetoric, the truth was clear. Torture kept women silent. It maintained hierarchies. It made sure that no one mistook justice for equality. And it worked. Generations of women lived in fear of not only death, but of shame. That fear controlled them more effectively than whips or chains ever could. With roots planted in myth, religion, and law, torture became the natural extension of control. But nowhere did this system grow more sophisticated, more brutal, and more normalized than in ancient Rome. There, the empire that boasted of philosophy, roads, and civilization also perfected humiliation as law. Rome is often remembered as the cradle of law, engineering, and order, the empire that gave the world aqueducts, roads, and philosophy. But beneath the marble pillars and triumphal arches lay a system designed not only to control conquered nations, but to control women. In Rome, torture was not chaos, it was codified. It was written into law, sanctified by religion, and executed with chilling precision. Women were not simply citizens or wives, they were property, and property could be punished, humiliated, and broken as the state pleased. At the heart of Roman law lay the concept of manus, literally hand. When a woman married, she passed from the manus of her father into the manus of her husband. She lost her legal identity, her property, and her freedom. She could not own land, sign contracts, or even make decisions without male permission. In essence, she ceased to exist in the eyes of the law, and if she disobeyed, Roman courts recognized her husband's right to punish her, not as an equal, but as a master. Beatings, confinement, and humiliation were sanctioned, framed not as violence, but as discipline. Rome disguised cruelty as order. Perhaps the most chilling example of Rome's double standards was the Vestal Virgins. Chosen as children to serve the goddess Vesta, they were revered as symbols of purity, entrusted with guarding the sacred flame. But their honor came with chains. Vestal virgins were forbidden to marry, forbidden to love, forbidden to experience intimacy for 30 years. Should they break their vow, their punishment was not execution by sword or flame. It was burial alive, a small underground chamber, a loaf of bread, a jug of water. They would suffocate slowly, dying in darkness, condemned not for betrayal of state secrets, but for their sexuality. Rome celebrated this cruelty as holy. To the public, the burial was purification, not murder. Yet beneath the ritual lay humiliation, the message that even the most honored women were never free. If Rome's laws humiliated free women, enslaved women endured far worse. They were property in the truest sense, used, exploited, and discarded without consequence. Masters could rape them without question. Their children were automatically enslaved, extending the cycle of control. Some were forced into brothels, paraded for soldiers, or used as concubines. Their humiliation was not an exception, but an expectation. Writers like Juvenal joked about the sexual use of slaves, while elite Romans displayed their exotic female captives as symbols of power. Torture here was not punishment. It was daily life. Roman trials often blurred the line between justice and spectacle. Women accused of adultery, witchcraft, or poisoning were paraded through streets, stripped naked, their crimes announced publicly. The most humiliating punishment was damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Women accused of immorality could be tied, stripped, and thrown into arenas where lions or bears tore them apart before cheering crowds. Death was certain, but humiliation was the true weapon. These women were reduced to entertainment, their suffering transformed into Roman theatre. The Lex Julia de Adulteriis exposed Rome's hypocrisy. A woman caught in adultery could be executed, her father or husband even legally entitled to kill her if caught in the act. But men, they could sleep with prostitutes, slaves, or unmarried women freely. The law protected not marriage, but property rights, ensuring that lineage and inheritance remained unquestioned. Thus, adultery was not a moral failing, it was a crime of humiliation. A wife's body was her husband's honor. To damage it was to humiliate him. And so the woman, not the man, was punished. Even when spared execution, women faced humiliations designed to scar their identity. Heads were shaved, clothes torn, faces branded. Some were paraded on donkey carts, mocked by crowds. These punishments were not about reform, but about breaking spirit, reducing the accused to symbols of shame. Roman fathers wielded terrifying power too. The jus vitae necesque, the right of life and death, allowed a father to kill his daughter if he believed she dishonored the family. No trial, no defense, only humiliation ending in blood. Rome weaponized female sexuality as propaganda. Elite women were forced into symbolic roles, empresses portrayed as paragons of chastity, others demonized as promiscuous threats. Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius, was painted as a nymphomaniac, accused of competing with prostitutes in brothels. Whether true or fabricated, her humiliation served politics. By shaming women publicly, Rome reinforced its structures privately. Rome's genius lay not just in roads and laws, but in its ability to make cruelty ordinary. Torture was not seen as extraordinary horror. It was woven into life, into courts, homes, and temples. Women did not need to witness lions in the arena to feel fear. The humiliation of one woman echoed across neighborhoods, reminding all others of the cost of disobedience. Rome prided itself on being civilized, a beacon of law and order in a barbaric world. Yet its civilization was built on humiliation. The same society that debated philosophy and built aqueducts also forced virgins into graves, branded wives, and turned enslaved women into commodities. This is Rome's true paradox: order maintained by cruelty, law enforced by humiliation, civilization constructed upon domination. And Rome was not alone. To its east, another civilization, one famed for democracy, philosophy, and theatre, also concealed cruelty beneath ideals. In ancient Greece, shame itself became the weapon, a theatre of humiliation designed to silence women. When we imagine ancient Greece, we think of marble temples, philosophers debating truth, and the birth of democracy. Athens is praised as the foundation of reason, logic, and liberty. But beneath the statues and speeches lay a different reality, one where liberty was for men, and women lived under a system of humiliation and control. Greece did not always wield the lash or the executioner S-blade in the same way as Rome. Instead, its greatest weapon was shame. Greek democracy was built on exclusion. Women were not citizens. They could not vote, could not hold office, could not speak in the assemblies that decided the fate of their city. Even in courts, their voices were suspect. They were represented by male guardians, fathers, husbands, or sons who spoke on their behalf. In effect, women were silenced, not only in public, but in law. This silence was reinforced by humiliation. To be excluded from citizenship was to be branded incomplete, unworthy of participation in the very society one sustained with labor and children. While men debated freedom, women lived in shadow. One of the most humiliating practices in Athens was the punishment for adultery. A woman accused of infidelity could be paraded half naked through the streets, her head shaved, her body marked. Her reputation destroyed, she became a living warning to others. By contrast, men faced no such humiliation. A husband could visit prostitutes, keep concubines, or exploit slaves without consequence. The law made clear fidelity was not about morality, it was about property. A woman's body ensured legitimate heirs, so her sexuality was tightly policed. Her humiliation safeguarded inheritance and male honor. Exposure forcing women to stand naked in public was another weapon. In certain cases, adulteresses, prostitutes, or those accused of disobedience were stripped and displayed. Crowds gathered not to witness justice, but to indulge in spectacle. The point was not execution, it was degradation. A woman stripped before her community lost her dignity forever. Even if she survived, her humiliation became permanent exile, cutting her off from society and forcing her into silence. Greek society thrived on slavery, and enslaved women bore the heaviest burden. They were not only forced into labor, but subjected to constant sexual exploitation. Masters used them freely. Courts did not recognize their consent. Children born from these unions were enslaved too, their very existence a reminder of how women's bodies were used to sustain the system. In some cases, enslaved women were tortured to provide testimony in court. The logic was chilling. Slaves were believed incapable of truth unless forced through pain. So when accusations arose, women were strapped, beaten, and humiliated into confessions. Their suffering was accepted as a normal part of justice. Greek philosophy, often hailed as the pursuit of wisdom, also rationalized female subjugation. Aristotle described women as incomplete men, lacking reason, fit only to serve. Such ideas were not confined to dusty scrolls, they shaped law, education, and social life. By framing women as defective by nature, philosophers provided justification for humiliation. A woman's voice was dismissed as irrational, her independence dangerous. When society branded women as lesser beings, humiliation became not abuse, but reinforcement of natural order. Religion, too, played a role. Certain festivals demanded the public display of women, sometimes forcing them into humiliating dances or rituals meant to symbolize purity and submission. In Sparta, girls were required to appear semi-nude in public ceremonies, their bodies judged as symbols of state strength. Though framed as tradition, these acts reduced women to objects sacred when obedient, mocked when not. Once again, humiliation served as spectacle, reinforcing control through ritual. Even Greece's greatest cultural pride, its theatre, was weaponized. In comedies, women were mocked, portrayed as lustful, foolish, or shrewish. Male actors in masks exaggerated femininity into caricature. The laughter of the audience was itself an act of humiliation, turning women into symbols of vice. These portrayals shaped public perception, making real women easier to control. If every woman could be imagined as a nagging scold or an insatiable temptress, then her humiliation was not only accepted but expected. Humiliation extended into daily life through economic control. Women rarely handled money or property. Dowries passed to husbands, inheritance flowed through male lines, and widows depended on guardianship. Economic disempowerment ensured that disobedience was punished not only with shame but with poverty. In many cases, widows or unmarried women accused of immorality faced both exile and destitution. Their humiliation became survival's end proof that independence led only to ruin. Perhaps the cruelest aspect of Greek control was the contrast between ideals and reality. The same society that celebrated philosophy, reason, and democracy justified humiliating women as irrational, unworthy, and dangerous. The Parthenon rose as a temple to beauty, yet behind its columns women were silenced, paraded, and humiliated. This hypocrisy deepened the impact of shame. To be a woman in Greece was to live constantly beneath ideals you could never share in, watching freedom celebrated while knowing it was forbidden to you. And yet, Greece was not unique. Across the Mediterranean, in the temples of Egypt and the courts of Babylon, humiliation also thrived. There, torture was cloaked in sacred rituals and royal decrees, transforming the female body into both sacred vessel and target of punishment. If Greece weaponized shame and Rome codified cruelty into law, Egypt and the Near Eastern empires revealed another chilling truth. The female body could be sacred, and that very sacredness made it a target. In these societies, fertility, motherhood, and purity were exalted. Yet when women defied expectations or threatened the structures of power, those same ideals were turned against them. Their bodies became the battlegrounds on which kings, priests, and husbands inscribed their authority. In Egypt, fertility was revered. Goddesses like Isis embodied motherhood, nurturing, and life itself. Women who bore children, especially sons, were celebrated as vital to family and state. Yet this reverence came with chains. The expectation to produce heirs turned a woman's womb into property. Failure meant shame, infidelity meant disgrace, defiance meant torture. Near Eastern societies like Babylon and Assyria were no different. Laws recorded in the Code of Hammurabi reveal punishments aimed directly at women's bodies. A wife accused of adultery could be drowned. A priestess who defied her vows could be burned. A woman who dishonored her husband might be mutilated, her nose or ears cut away to mark her humiliation. Fertility was sacred, but women themselves were expendable. Adultery stood at the center of many humiliations, not because it was immoral, but because it threatened lineage. In Egypt, women accused of unfaithfulness were sometimes stripped and beaten in public, their disgrace performed before neighbors and kin. In Babylon, the accused might be forced to undergo trial by ordeal, thrown into a river, left to the gods to decide her innocence. Survival meant vindication, but drowning sealed her guilt in watery silence. These rituals were not just punishments. They were performances, spectacles that bound entire communities to the humiliation of one woman. By watching, by gossiping, by remembering, the public became complicit in her control. The irony of Egypt and Mesopotamia lay in the treatment of women tied to the sacred. Priestesses were honored, their roles crucial to religious life. Yet the same position made them vulnerable. A priestess accused of impurity could face tortures masked as rituals of cleansing. Floggings, confinements, and enforced starvation were justified as spiritual purification, even as they broke bodies and spirits. In Assyria, certain temple women lived under laws stricter than any others. If accused of sexual misconduct, their punishments were swift and brutal branding, mutilation, even execution. Religion did not shield them, it intensified their vulnerability. Royal women faced another layer of humiliation. Their bodies became tools of politics. Queens and princesses were married off to secure alliances. Their fertility paraded as proof of dynastic strength. But if they failed to conceive, they faced whispers, demotions, even exile. Some were accused of witchcraft or treason, tortured not because of guilt, but because their inability to produce heirs threatened royal legitimacy. In Babylon, records speak of royal women confined to palaces like prisoners, their movements restricted, their dignity stripped. They were not free to speak, act, or even mourn without permission. Their humiliation served as warning. Even at the highest rank, a woman's body belonged to the state. Honor killings, often framed as sacred duty, appeared across Near Eastern traditions. Women accused of dishonoring their families, whether through disobedience, defiance, or sexual suspicion, could be killed by fathers or brothers without consequence. Their deaths were cast as restorations of purity, sacrifices demanded not by gods but by men. In Egypt, some inscriptions hint at punishments masked as divine offerings. Women executed for supposed betrayal of the pharaoh, their bodies displayed as examples of loyalty's cost. In Mesopotamia, public stonings of adulteresses were carried out in ritual fashion, embedding humiliation into communal memory. Like Greece and Rome, Egypt and the Near East relied on public humiliation as strategy. Punishments were staged where all could see, reinforcing fear. A woman dragged through streets, a wife drowned in a river, a priestess branded in a temple courtyard. These scenes were not hidden. They were spectacles designed to remind every woman of her place. Humiliation worked because it attacked not only the body, but the spirit. To be mocked, stripped, and shamed before neighbors was to lose dignity forever. In societies where reputation meant survival, humiliation was a fate worse than death. The greatest cruelty lay in the contradiction. Women's bodies were called sacred vessels of fertility, symbols of divine power. Yet when women stepped beyond the roles men demanded, that sacredness became weapon. The womb that gave life was targeted for torture. The voice of the priestess was silenced with mutilation. The queen who could not conceive was humiliated, her body declared defective. This duality, sacred yet profane, ensured control. Women could never win. To be fertile was duty. To be infertile was shame. To be pure was confinement. To be impure was punishment. Every path led back to domination. Egypt and the Near East show how torture and humiliation could be dressed in sacred robes justified as divine will. But beyond rituals and decrees lay something even more chilling: the invention of devices and tools designed to silence women physically. From gags to corsets, from collars to clamps, these instruments reveal how creativity itself was harnessed for control. By the time Europe entered the medieval and early modern eras, torture had become a craft. It was no longer only about law, ritual, or myth, it was about invention. Metal workers, priests, and magistrates collaborated not to protect society, but to design instruments that could humiliate, disfigure, and silence women with surgical precision. These devices reveal the cold creativity of oppression, objects made not to kill swiftly, but to prolong suffering, to transform a woman's body into a spectacle of warning. Few devices embody this cruelty more than the breast ripper. Forged from iron and shaped like talons, it was heated until red hot, then clamped onto a woman's breast and torn away. flesh ripped from bone, blood pouring, screams filling the air. Its purpose was not only physical destruction but symbolic desecration. The breast, a symbol of motherhood and nurture, became a target. By destroying it, authorities declared that a woman's power to give life, to sustain, could be turned into shame. Accused adulteresses, supposed witches, or simply outspoken women were dragged before crowds and subjected to this horror, their bodies mutilated to remind every onlooker of the dangers of defiance. Another chilling device was the pear of anguish, a hollow metal bulb, smooth on the outside, opened like petals when a screw was turned. Inserted into the mouth, vagina, or rectum, it expanded slowly, tearing soft flesh from within. This was torture, hidden in silence. A woman bound to a table, gagged by the device, suffered in secret agony. The pear was used against women accused of abortion, of homosexuality, of speaking too boldly. By targeting the womb or the voice, the device attacked what society most feared: women's power to create and women's power to speak. In medieval Britain and Scotland, another device became infamous: the scold's bridle. A cage of iron locked over a woman's head, it contained a spike that pressed into her tongue. The moment she tried to speak, the spike cut into her flesh. Worn for hours or days, sometimes with bells attached, so every movement echoed in humiliation. The bridle silenced gossip, complaint, or protest. But more than silence, it inflicted public shame. Women, paraded through towns, laughed at, mocked, reduced to grotesque spectacles. The bridle criminalized the very act of speech, branding women's voices as dangerous weapons to be crushed. Not all devices sought quick destruction. Some inflicted slow, suffocating torment. The iron corset, resembling armor, wrapped tightly around the torso. Heavy, spiked, and locked in place, it compressed ribs, bruised lungs, and dislocated bones. Women forced to wear it endured days or weeks of agony. Every movement became painful, every breath shallow. Sometimes it was used as moral correction for daughters, wives, or suspected witches, punishment not through execution, but through relentless daily suffering. By turning femininity itself into a prison, the corset transformed beauty and grace into instruments of pain. Beyond elaborate inventions, simpler tools carried equal humiliation. Branding irons scorched letters into women's skin, marking them as adulteresses or prostitutes. Spiked collars forced them to hold rigid postures, cutting into flesh if they moved. Heavy chains confined them in public stocks, leaving them exposed to jeers and abuse. These punishments lived beyond the moment. A brand on the face or chest could never be hidden. It became a lifelong humiliation, a mark ensuring that shame followed the victim long after pain had passed. The most terrifying element of these tools was not just the pain they inflicted, but the theater they created. Women bound in bridles, strapped in corsets, or mutilated by rippers were rarely hidden. They were paraded, displayed, mocked. Crowds laughed, children pointed, priests blessed. Humiliation became communal. The devices worked not only on the victim but on every woman watching. The message was clear: speak too loudly, love too freely, live too boldly, and this could be you. These devices also reveal the perverse creativity of control. Blacksmiths and torturers adapted tools of labor into tools of pain. Implements once meant for farming or surgery were twisted into instruments of humiliation. Societies that could design cathedrals and catapults also designed bridles and pears. This creativity was not innovation for progress, but for domination. Each device was a fusion of engineering and ideology, a machine built to enforce silence and obedience. Perhaps the most infamous device of all, the Iron Maiden, became a legend. A sarcophagus lined with spikes, said to impale victims slowly, it was long believed to epitomize medieval cruelty. But modern historians reveal it was likely a fabrication, invented in the 18th century to shock museum visitors. Yet the myth itself is telling. Even when devices did not exist, society imagined them. The fantasy of women enclosed, pierced, destroyed became spectacle enough. The Iron Maiden's popularity proves that humiliation was not just historical reality, but cultural obsession. These tools of silence remind us that torture was never only about inflicting pain, it was about creating memory. A scar on the body became a scar on society, embedding fear into generations. Devices like the bridle or the ripper taught lessons without words, leaving images too horrifying to forget. The legacy is clear: torture made humiliation permanent. It ensured that even when devices were set aside, their memory haunted women, controlling them long after the iron cooled. And yet, even as these devices rusted and laws changed, the patterns endured. Humiliation as control survived, shifting from iron tools to cultural norms, from public spectacles to whispered judgments. The methods evolved, but the message remained. Women who defied power would be broken, not always with chains, but with shame. When we look back at ancient societies, their devices, their rituals, and their laws, it is easy to believe these cruelties are buried in the past. The iron has rusted. The arenas are ruins. The trials have faded into dust. Yet humiliation as a weapon of control has never truly vanished. It lingers, reshaped, refined, disguised in modern clothes. The legacy of ancient torture is not confined to museums. It echoes in the ways societies still police women, S-bodies, voices, and identities. Medieval bridles and corsets no longer parade women through streets, but silence persists. In many cultures, women are shamed for speaking too loudly, too freely, or too boldly. The spike against the tongue has become ridicule, online harassment, or the subtle punishments of exclusion. The iron corset has been replaced by impossible beauty standards, diets, and surgeries that suffocate rather than protect. Chains of steel have given way to chains of expectation, each link forged from centuries of belief that obedience is virtue. Where once towns gathered to laugh at women in stocks, today millions watch as women are humiliated on screens. Viral scandals, leaked images, online shaming campaigns, these are the modern spectacles. The jeering crowd has not disappeared. It has multiplied, digital and anonymous. And just as in the medieval square, the lesson is clear: step outside prescribed boundaries and humiliation will follow. Ancient Rome codified torture into law. Today, legal systems in many places still reflect echoes of that structure. Women face harsher penalties for adultery or sexual expression in certain regions, echoing the double standards of antiquity. Even in supposedly equal societies, survivors of assault are often interrogated as though they themselves were guilty, their credibility questioned, their dignity shredded. The spirit of Rome, S. Manus, survives whenever a woman, S. body, is treated as property, whether by family, by state, or by partner. Control shifts form but does not disappear. Egypt and Mesopotamia wrapped humiliation in sacred robes. That legacy endures wherever faith is used to justify restrictions on women's autonomy. Rules about dress, silence, obedience, though less bloody than stonings or drownings, still carry the same underlying message. Your body is not your own. Your voice must be contained. The divine is evoked not to protect, but to restrain. Yet perhaps the most enduring legacy lies in memory. These stories, these devices, these humiliations are rarely told in classrooms or textbooks. They are footnotes, curiosities, or myths dismissed as exaggerations. But forgetting is dangerous. Each scar hidden, each silence unbroken, leaves space for cruelty to repeat itself. When we remember the breast ripper, the pair of anguish, the scold's bridle, we confront not only past brutality but present echoes. We see the patterns: control disguised as justice, humiliation disguised as morality, suffering disguised as order. And yet women survived. They endured bridals and corsets, trials and drownings, ridicule and mutilation. Some resisted openly, others quietly, but each survival was defiance. Every woman who lived despite humiliation carried a story that threatened to unravel the system designed to silence her. Today that survival continues. Telling these stories, dragging them from shadows into light, is itself resistance. Naming the tools, exposing the laws, remembering the victims, transforms humiliation into testimony. Humiliation has always been the hidden twin of torture. Pain alone kills the body. Humiliation kills the spirit, infecting memory, reshaping identity. That is why ancient societies perfected it. It was not enough to punish women, they had to erase them, to make examples of them, to turn their suffering into theatre. But the endurance of these stories proves something greater. The iron did not win, the silence did not last. The legacy is not only one of cruelty but of survival. Every retelling is a refusal to let humiliation remain the final word. So we must ask ourselves, how much of that legacy still lives among us? How often do we watch humiliation as entertainment? How often do we accept silence as virtue? How often do we excuse cruelty as order? The torture devices of the past may be locked in museums, but their spirit survives wherever humiliation controls, wherever silence is demanded. Wherever women are told their bodies, their voices, their choices are not their own. The iron is gone, but the lesson remains. Will we forget it, or will we finally break the chain?